The year is the 68th winter since the legions first established their presence along the winding, frost-bound banks of the Danubius. Here, on the northernmost fringe of the Roman world, the seasons do not merely change. They settle with a heavy, crystalline permanence that seems to slow the very heartbeat of the empire. Outside the thick, lime-washed walls of the castrum, the world is a study in monochromatic stillness. The sky is the color of beaten lead, heavy and low, pressing down upon the jagged silhouettes of the pine forests that line the horizon. There is no wind this morning, only a profound, echoing silence that carries the weight of 1,000 fallen snowflakes. Inside the contubernium, the air is thick with the comforting, humdrum sense of a long winter's residency. It is the smell of seasoned oak wood smoldering in the central hearth, the faint, acidic tang of oiled leather, and the earthy, musk-heavy scent of thick wool blankets that have absorbed the steam of many nights. Lucius lies still beneath his pileus, a heavy cap of felted wool, listening to the rhythmic, synchronized breathing of his 7 tentmates. It is a slow, steady cadence, a human metronome that keeps time with the slow turning of the world outside. He does not move. He simply observes the way the first, pale light of the subarctic dawn begins to filter through the small, high vent in the stone wall. The light is not bright. It is a soft, bruised purple that gradually transitions into a dusty gray. It catches the suspended particles of dust dancing in the still air, turning them into a slow-motion cascade of golden motes. Lucius watches one particular mote as it drifts, caught in a tiny, invisible thermal rising from the dying embers of the fire. It rises, circles, and then descends, eventually landing on the rough, uneven surface of a wooden stool. The stool is carved from a solid block of ash, its grain visible even in the dim light, swirling patterns of dark and light wood that tell the story of a tree that grew long before the legion arrived. The texture of the wool against his skin is his primary world in this moment. It is a coarse, honest fabric, woven with a density designed to trap the heat of the body. He can feel the individual fibers, the slight scratch of the guard hairs from the sheep of the Apennines, the way the lanolin remains in the weave, providing a faint, waxy resistance to the touch. It is a heavy weight, a physical manifestation of security. He shifts his foot slightly, and the sound is a soft, dry rasp against the straw-stuffed mattress. The straw is old and compressed, making a dull, hollow thwack sound as it settles under his shifting weight. Slowly, with a deliberation that mirrors the freezing of a pond, Lucius begins the process of rising. Every movement is a study in economy and sensory awareness. He reaches out a hand from beneath the warmth of the blankets. The air in the room, though tempered by the hearth, is sharp and biting. It hits his skin like a physical presence, a thin veil of cold that makes the hairs on his arms stand in a slow, undulating wave. He feels the contrast, the radiating heat of his own core meeting the indifferent chill of the room. He reaches for his tunica, which lies folded neatly at the foot of his bunk. The fabric is cold to the touch, a shocking, crisp sensation that zips through his fingertips. He pulls it under the blankets first, warming it against his chest before sliding it over his head. The sound of the wool sliding over his skin is a muffled, rhythmic shhhh, a sound like soft rain on a distant roof. He feels the structure of the garment, the heavy seams, the way the wool stretches and then snaps back into place. It is a garment of utility, devoid of ornament, yet in this freezing dawn, it feels like the most precious silk in Rome. Next come the brachy, the long trousers adopted from the northern tribes, a concession to the brutal climate that the Mediterranean sun never prepared them for. They are made of a thick, felted material, dyed a deep, earthy brown. As he pulls them on, he feels the snugness around his calves, the way the fabric bunches at the knees, creating a layered insulation. He spends several minutes simply smoothing the fabric down, his palms moving in slow, circular motions over his thighs. The friction creates a gentle, localized warmth, a small victory against the encroaching frost. He sits on the edge of the bunk now, his feet resting on the cold flagstones of the floor. The stones are grit-textured, hewn from the local limestone. They hold the cold of the earth, a deep, subterranean chill that seeps into the soles of his feet. He does not pull away. He accepts the sensation, grounding himself in the reality of the fortress. He reaches for his udons, his thick socks of knitted wool. They are lumpy and uneven, handmade by a mother or a wife in a distant, sun-drenched valley. Yet here they are the ultimate luxury. He pulls them on, feeling the way the knit expands to accommodate his heel, the soft pressure of the wool against his toes. The act of lacing his caligy, his heavy military boots, is a ritual of focus. The leather is stiff from the cold, smelling of tallow and pine resin. He picks up the first boot, feeling its substantial weight. The soles are thick, studded with iron hobnails that will bite into the frozen earth. He begins to thread the leather thongs through the eyelets. It is a repetitive, hypnotic task. Pull, cross, tighten. Pull, cross, tighten. The leather creaks, a high-pitched, protesting sound in the quiet room. Each knot is tied with a precise, habitual tension, ensuring the boot becomes an extension of his own leg. He feels the pressure of the leather wrapping around his ankle, the support it provides, the promise of stability on the slick, icy paths of the camp. He stands up. His joints make a faint, muffled popping sound like small twigs snapping under a layer of snow. He moves toward the hearth, where the embers are a dull, pulsing orange like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. He takes a small iron poker and gently stirs the coals. The sound is a metallic clink followed by the soft hiss of shifting ash. A few sparks leap up, bright and fleeting, before vanishing into the darkness of the chimney. He watches them, fascinated by their brief, glowing lives. He adds a few small splinters of pine to the fire. They catch quickly, the resin bubbling and spitting with a rhythmic pop, pop, pop. The smell of fresh pine smoke fills the air, a sharp, clean scent that cuts through the staleness of the room. It smells of the forest, of cold sap, and of the enduring resilience of the north. Lucius prepares his morning draft. He takes a ceramic cup, its surface glazed in a deep, glossy red, the famous terra sigillata. It is smooth and cool in his hand. He pours water from a heavy clay pitcher, the sound a steady, hollow glug, glug, glug that echoes in the quiet room. He places the cup near the edge of the hearth to take the chill off. He watches the surface of the water. It is perfectly still, a dark mirror reflecting the dim light of the rafters. After a few moments, tiny beads of condensation begin to form on the outside of the cup, dulling the red glaze into a soft, matte finish. He picks it up, feeling the warmth radiating through the ceramic into his palms. He sips. The water is flat and cold, but as it travels down his throat, it wakes his senses, a slow ripple of hydration spreading through his body. He moves to the heavy oak door of the barracks. The wood is thick, reinforced with iron bands. He places his hand on the iron latch. It is freezing, a sharp, searing cold that seems to stick to his skin for a fraction of a second. He presses down. The latch lifts with a heavy, metallic clack. He pulls the door open just a few inches. The sound of the outside world rushes in, not as a noise, but as a change in atmospheric pressure. It is the sound of the wind moving through the frozen battlements, a low, mournful whistle. It brings with it the smell of the river, a scent of deep ice, wet stone, and frozen mud. The air is so cold it feels thin, vibrating with the stillness of the frost. He steps out onto the covered walkway. The ground is covered in a fine, powdery dusting of hoarfrost, which crunches under his hobnailed boots with a sound like breaking glass. Crunch, crunch, crunch. He looks out across the courtyard of the castrum. The world is bathed in the blue light of the pre-dawn. Every surface is coated in a delicate white fur of frost. The wooden palisades, the stone granaries, the stacks of firewood, all are transformed into ghostly versions of themselves. He breathes out, and a thick white plume of steam erupts from his mouth, swirling in the air before slowly dissipating. He watches his breath, intrigued by the way it lingers, a brief, ethereal ghost of his own internal warmth. He begins his walk toward the river. This is the morning's great task, the ritual of the bath. It is not a bath of luxury, but one of discipline and necessity. He walks past the silent rows of barracks, his footsteps the only sound in the sleeping camp. He passes the stables, where he can hear the low, rhythmic munching of the horses and the heavy, warm scent of hay and manure. It is a pocket of animal heat in the frozen world. He continues toward the rear gate, the Porta di Cumana. The sentry there is a shadow wrapped in a thick cloak, his spear a glint of silver in the gloom. They exchange a silent nod, a recognition of shared duty and shared cold. As he exits the fortress, the landscape opens up. The river Danubius lies before him, a vast, dark ribbon of moving water cutting through a white world. It does not look like water. It looks like molten lead, heavy and viscous, churning slowly between banks of jagged ice. The sound of the river is a constant, low-frequency hum, a shhhhh that never stops, the sound of 1,000 ice crystals grinding against one another. He reaches the bank where the reeds are frozen solid, encased in clear sheaths of ice that look like glass flutes. He stands there for a moment, simply observing. The river is breathing. A thick mist rises from its surface, the river smoke, where the slightly warmer water meets the frigid air. It veils the far bank in a shifting, ghostly white. He looks down at the water's edge. The ice forms intricate, fractal patterns, ferns and stars and long, needle-like shards that reach out into the current. He begins to undress. This is done with the same slow deliberation as his dressing. He unlaces his boots, the sound of the leather thongs snapping against the frost-covered ground. He removes his socks, feeling the immediate, biting grip of the air on his feet. He removes his trousers, then his tunic. He stands there, a solitary figure of pale skin against the vast, blue-gray landscape. The cold is no longer a concept. It is a total embrace. It tightens his skin. pulls at his muscles and sharpens his mind to a single, crystalline point of focus. He steps toward the water. His feet find the smooth, rounded river stones, each one coated in a treacherous film of ice. He moves with the grace of a man who knows that a single slip means a different kind of ending. He reaches the point where the ice gives way to the flow. He looks at the water. It is dark, deep, and utterly indifferent. He takes a breath, a deep, lung-filling draft of the freezing air, and prepares to step into the heart of the winter. The first contact of the skin with the moving water is not a sharp pain, but a sudden, overwhelming expansion of awareness. As Lucius lowers his left foot into the edge of the Danubius, the water does not feel like a liquid. It feels like a heavy, silken pressure, an invisible hand wrapping firmly around his ankle. The temperature is a profound, absolute zero of the senses. It is so cold that the brain momentarily interprets it as heat, a searing white-hot flash that radiates from the point of contact up through the marrow of his bones. He stands perfectly still, one foot on the icy, rounded stones of the bank, the other submerged in the dark, swirling current. He waits. He allows the sensation to settle, to transition from a shock into a steady, rhythmic pulse. The water at the edge is shallow, barely covering his instep. He watches the way the current breaks around his leg. The water is clear yet dark like a piece of polished obsidian. It flows with a heavy, oily consistency, creating a tiny V-shaped wake behind his heel. A small piece of river debris, a fragment of a frozen leaf, drifts toward him. It hits his shin and clings there for a fleeting second, a dark, veined ghost against his pale skin, before the current sweeps it away into the gray mist. He focuses on the feeling of that leaf, the minute, scratchy texture of its decayed edges, the way it felt like a tiny, cold finger brushing against him. He takes another step. Now both feet are submerged to the mid-calf. The pressure increases. The Danubius is a powerful entity, even at its edges, and he can feel the weight of the entire northern wilderness pushing against his legs. The sensation of the cold has moved past the initial flash of heat and has become a deep, vibrating hum. It is a dull, heavy ache that seems to solidify his muscles, turning them into something resembling the very stones beneath his feet. He breathes out, a long, slow exhalation that forms a thick, rolling cloud of steam. He synchronizes his heartbeat with the movement of the river, a slow, deliberate cadence that prevents the panic of the cold from taking hold. The stones beneath his feet are slick with a fine layer of river silt and microscopic algae, now dormant in the winter's grip. He feels every indentation, every smooth curve of the pebbles through the numbing soles of his feet. There is a large, flat slab of gray basalt just ahead, submerged under 6 inches of water. He moves toward it, his steps slow and high-lifted, the water cascading off his legs with a sound like heavy fabric tearing. Slosh, ripple, hiss. He reaches the slab and stands upon it. It is steady, a firm pedestal in the shifting flow. The water is now at his knees. He looks down and sees his legs distorted by the refraction of the current. They look pale and strange, like the marble limbs of a statue lost in a sunken temple. The hair on his legs lies flat against the skin, trapped in the crystalline embrace of the river. He reaches down with one hand, dipping his fingers into the flow. The water traces the lines of his palm, filling the valleys between his knuckles with a heavy, cold weight. He brings his hand up to his face, the movement slow and ritualistic. He splashes the water onto his forehead. The contact is a revelation. The water is so cold it seems to bypass the skin and strike directly at the bone of his skull. It trickles down his temples, over his eyes, and into his beard. He feels each individual droplet as it travels. One drop hangs from the tip of his nose, a cold, heavy pendant that catches the dim light of the morning. It stays there for a long moment, vibrating with his breath, before falling back into the river with a microscopic plink. He repeats the motion, scooping the water with both hands now, bathing his face and neck. The sound of the water splashing against his skin is a soft, rhythmic shhh lap, shhh lap, a sound that mimics the distant crashing of waves on a shore he hasn't seen in years. He begins the cleaning process. In the absence of the warm oils and strigils of the city baths, the legionary relies on the river itself. He reaches down and picks up a handful of fine gray river sand from a pocket in the basalt slab. The sand is coarse and gritty, made of pulverized granite and quartz. He begins to rub it over his arms. The friction creates a localized heat, a sharp, tingling sensation that contrasts beautifully with the surrounding cold. He listens to the sound of the sand against his skin, a dry, rasping scritch, scritch, scritch. It is a satisfying sound, the sound of layers of dust and sweat being methodically erased. He works with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. First the left arm from the wrist to the shoulder, the sand scouring the skin until it turns a healthy, vibrant red. Then the right arm. He focuses on the texture of the sand, how some grains are larger and sharper than others, how the water turns the dry grit into a dark, heavy paste. He rinses his arms by plunging them deep into the current. The water washes away the sand in a sudden, swirling cloud of gray, leaving his skin feeling incredibly smooth and hypersensitive to the air. The air, which felt so freezing moments ago, now feels strangely mild in comparison to the water. This is the secret of the winter bath, the recalibration of the body's internal thermostat. As he stands in the river, his core heat is pushed outward, creating a thin, invisible barrier against the elements. He feels a sense of profound stillness. The world around him, the gray sky, the white banks, the dark forest, seems to be held in a state of perfect equilibrium. There is no movement but the water, no sound but the low-frequency thrum of the river. He moves deeper. The water rises to his waist. This is the most difficult transition. The cold hits the large muscle groups of the thighs and the sensitive skin of the torso. He feels his breath catch, a sudden involuntary hitch in his chest. He holds it. He waits. He focuses on a single point on the far bank, a jagged black branch of an oak tree encrusted with white hoarfrost. He stares at that branch, memorizing every knot, every sharp angle, every dusting of snow. He projects his consciousness onto that branch, becoming as still and as cold as the wood. Gradually, his breathing levels out. The hitch vanishes, replaced by a deep abdominal rhythm. The water at his waist becomes a familiar weight, a heavy belt of liquid ice. He takes a small piece of pumice stone from a leather pouch he had tied to a nearby reed earlier. The pumice is light and porous, a gift from a volcanic region far to the south. It feels like a piece of dried bone in his hand. He uses it to scrub his heels and the calluses of his palms. The sound is different from the sand, a deeper, more resonant grrrrr rich. He works the stone in circular motions, feeling the way it smooths the rough edges of his skin. The task is mundane, repetitive, and utterly engrossing. He finds himself lost in the geometry of the circles, the way the stone moves across the landscape of his foot. The smell of the river is more intense now that he is submerged. It is a complex, layering scent. There is the base note of wet stone and mineral-heavy silt. Above that, there is the sharp, ozonic scent of the ice itself, a smell that is less of a fragrance and more of a physical sensation in the nostrils, a crisp, clean vacuum. And finally, there is the faint, distant smell of the pine forest, a resinous balsamic quality that drifts over the water on the invisible currents of the air. It is the smell of the world in stasis, of a nature that has been stripped of its summer excesses and reduced to its essential, freezing components. He begins to wash his chest and torso. He uses his hands, cupping the water and pouring it over his shoulders. Each pour is a deliberate act. He watches the water cascade down his chest, the way it divides into 100 tiny rivulets that follow the contours of his muscles. The water looks like liquid silver against his reddened skin. He feels the weight of each stream, the way the cold seems to penetrate deep into his lungs, forcing him to breathe more deeply, more fully. The sound is a continuous, melodic patter, 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 as the water hits the surface of the river. He stays in the water for what feels like an eternity, though the Roman sun has barely moved a finger's width above the horizon. The concept of time begins to dissolve in the monotony of the task and the intensity of the cold. There is only the now of the water, the now of the stone, the now of the breath. He feels a sense of immense clarity. The trivialities of the camp, the quality of the grain, the repair of the leather, the distant politics of the capital, all seem utterly irrelevant. There is only the survival of the body and the cleansing of the spirit in the heart of the Danubius. Slowly, he begins the process of extraction. He moves back toward the bank, his movements even slower than before to avoid the risk of cramp. As each part of his body emerges from the water, it is greeted by the air. The transition is startling. The air, which is well below freezing, feels like a warm, soft blanket compared to the river. His skin begins to steam. A thick, white vapor rises from his shoulders and chest, a ghostly aura of his own internal heat being released into the frozen morning. He looks like a man made of mist, a spirit rising from the depths. He reaches the muddy, frozen verge of the bank. He steps out, his feet making a heavy, wet thud on the earth. He does not rush. To rush is to lose the benefit of the discipline. He stands for a moment, his feet sinking slightly into the soft, silken mud that has not yet completely frozen under the shelter of the reeds. He feels the texture of the mud between his toes, a cool, squelching sensation that is oddly pleasant. He reaches for his towel. It is a large, rectangular piece of unbleached linen, woven with a heavy, ribbed texture. It has been hanging from the branch of a willow tree, and it is stiff with the cold. He takes it and begins to rub his body. The linen is coarse, almost like fine sandpaper. As he rubs, he feels the blood rushing back to the surface of his skin. The sensation is one of intense tingling, a million tiny needles of warmth dancing across his nerves. He works from his head down, drying his hair, his neck, his shoulders. The sound of the towel is a rhythmic frip-frap, frip-frap. It is a comforting domestic sound in the vast, wild landscape. He spends a long time on his feet, carefully drying between each toe, ensuring that no moisture remains to freeze once he puts his socks back on. He watches his skin turn from a pale, water-chilled blue to a bright, glowing pink. It is the color of life, the color of a body that has met the winter and held its own. He finishes drying himself. The towel is now damp and heavy, smelling faintly of the river and the clean scent of linen. He folds it with precise military neatness, his fingers moving with a slow, practiced grace. He stands there, naked in the freezing dawn, feeling more alive than he has felt in months. The cold is no longer an enemy. It is a companion, a sharp, honest presence that has stripped away everything unnecessary. He looks back at the river. The Danubius flows on, dark and indifferent, its mist still swirling in the gray light. He reaches for his first layer of clothing, the soft, warm wool of his tunic, ready to begin the long process of dressing once more. The steam continues to rise from Lucius's skin in a slow, undulating dance, a ghost-white vapor that curls into the frigid morning air. It is a testament to the internal furnace of the human body, a heat that feels concentrated and precious after the total immersion of the river. He stands on the riverbank, his feet pressing into the frozen mud, which gives way slightly under his weight with a soft, yielding squelch. The mud is a dark, silken gray, composed of centuries of river silt and decayed organic matter, and it feels cool and strangely smooth against the soles of his feet. He remains motionless for a long moment, allowing the air to finish the work of the towel, feeling the microscopic droplets of moisture evaporate from his pores. He reaches for his subligaculum, the simple linen loincloth that serves as his first layer of modesty and protection. The linen is unbleached, a pale cream color that looks stark against the deep brown of the winter earth. It has been sitting upon a flat, frost-covered stone, and it has absorbed the ambient chill of the Danubius valley. As he shakes it out, the fabric makes a crisp, snapping sound, like a dry leaf breaking underfoot. He wraps the cloth around his waist with movements that are practiced, rhythmic, and entirely devoid of haste. He feels the texture of the linen, a slightly rough, honest weave that speaks of the loom and the flax fields of the South. He ties the knots with a precise tension, the fabric biting gently into his skin, providing a foundational sense of structure and security. The coolness of the linen gradually yields to his body heat, a slow transition from a sharp chill to a neutral, comforting presence. Next, he turns his attention to the tunica. This is no thin summer garment, but a heavy, double-thick weave of Gallic wool, dyed a deep, saturated crimson that has faded over months of campaign into a soft, earthy rust color. He picks it up from the branch of the willow tree where it had been draped. The wool is dense and heavy, its weight substantial in his hands. He runs his fingers over the surface of the fabric, feeling the individual lanolin-rich fibers. It smells of the barracks, of woodsmoke, cedar oil, and the faint, lingering scent of dry earth. He pulls the tunic over his head. The moment the wool touches his damp-warm skin, a profound change occurs. The fabric traps the layer of steam rising from his torso, creating a microenvironment of intense, humid warmth. It is a cocoon of his own making. He feels the slight scratch of the wool, a tactile reminder of the material's durability. He pulls the sleeves down his arms, feeling the fabric settle over his shoulders and back. The sound of the wool sliding against itself is a muffled, rhythmic swish-swish, a low-frequency vibration that seems to harmonize with the distant, steady flow of the river. He spends several minutes simply smoothing the tunic down, his hands moving in long, vertical strokes from his chest to his thighs. He ensures there are no bunches or folds that might chafe beneath his armor later in the day, though the armor is a concern for a much later hour. For now, there is only the wool. The brachy, his heavy trousers, are next. These are a concession to the brutal northern winters, a garment borrowed from the very tribes the empire seeks to contain. They are made of a thick, felted wool, so dense it is almost windproof. He sits upon a large, fallen log to put them on. The wood of the log is ancient and silvered by the weather, its bark long since stripped away to reveal a smooth, undulating grain. As he slides his legs into the trousers, he feels the immediate, heavy embrace of the felt. It is a different kind of warmth than the tunic, less humid, more structural. He laces the bottoms of the trousers around his ankles, the leather thongs making a soft tink as they strike the frozen ground. He feels the support of the fabric around his knees and thighs, a heavy, grounded sensation that makes him feel part of the landscape itself. Now comes the ritual of the udons, the thick, knitted socks. These are perhaps the most vital part of his attire in this climate. He takes them from his kit bag, which sits nestled among the frozen reeds. The socks are lumpy and thick, knitted from the coarsest wool available. He slides them over his feet, feeling the way the knit expands to accommodate the curve of his heel. The warmth is instantaneous. It is as if he is stepping into a pair of small, portable hearths. He wiggles his toes, feeling the wool compress and then spring back. He spends a significant amount of time ensuring the seams are perfectly aligned, for a single stray thread could lead to a blister over the miles of a march. The silence of the riverbank is punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic scritch of the wool against his skin. The caligae, the iconic military boots of the Roman legion, are a marvel of engineering. They lie waiting on the bank, their thick leather straps stiffened by the frost. Lucius picks up the right boot. It is heavy, its sole reinforced with nearly 100 iron hobnails. He turns the boot over, examining the pattern of the nails. They are worn smooth in some places, jagged in others, each one a record of the miles he has covered across the empire. He begins the process of lacing. This is a task that requires total concentration. He threads the long leather thongs through the complex web of eyelets, pulling them tight with a rhythmic creak snap. The leather protests the cold, its sound a high-pitched, rhythmic groan that echoes off the surface of the water. He starts at the toes and works his way up to the ankle, ensuring an even distribution of pressure. He feels the leather wrapping around his foot, the iron-studded sole providing a rigid, unyielding platform. He ties the final knot with a double loop, tucking the ends away with military precision. He repeats the process with the left boot. When he stands, the sound of his first step is a sharp, metallic crunch as the hobnails bite into the frozen earth. It is a sound of authority, of permanence, of a world ordered by the march of the legions. Finally, he reaches for his pinula, the heavy, hooded cloak that serves as his final defense against the elements. It is made of gausapa, a thick, shaggy wool that has been treated with oil to repel moisture. The cloak is a dark, somber gray, the color of the storm clouds that often gather over the Danubius. He drapes it over his shoulders, the weight of the garment settling like a physical burden of duty. He feels the shaggy texture of the wool against his neck. It is soft and dense, like the fur of a winter animal. He pulls the hood up over his head. The world changes instantly. The hood creates a small, private sanctuary of warmth. It dampens the sound of the wind and the river, reducing the vast landscape to the small circle of vision directly in front of him. He smells the oil in the wool, a sharp, resinous scent that reminds him of the pine forests. He reaches for his fibula, the bronze brooch used to fasten the cloak at his throat. The bronze is cold, its surface etched with simple, geometric patterns. He pins the fabric together, the pins sliding through the thick wool with a soft, muffled pop. The cloak is now a sealed unit, a portable shelter that will keep his body heat trapped against the freezing air of the march back to the fort. He stands still for a moment, fully dressed, looking out at the river. He feels a profound sense of equilibrium. The transition from the warmth of the barracks to the shock of the river, and now back to the layered warmth of his uniform, has been a cycle of renewal. He feels heavy, grounded, and utterly present in the moment. The mist on the river is beginning to lift, revealing the dark, skeletal shapes of the trees on the far bank. The sky has shifted from a deep violet to a pale, milky blue, though the sun remains hidden behind the heavy veil of clouds. He picks up his discarded towel and his empty water cup, placing them neatly into his leather satchel. Every action is performed with a slow, deliberate grace. He begins the walk back toward the Porta Decumana of the fortress. The path is a narrow ribbon of trodden snow and ice, winding between the frozen reeds and the jagged outcrops of limestone. With every step, his hobnailed boots make that rhythmic, comforting crunch, crunch, crunch on the frost. The sound is a steady cadence, a heartbeat for the morning. As he walks, he observes the minute details of the winter landscape. He sees a single spiderweb stretched between two stalks of dead grass, its delicate threads coated in tiny, translucent pearls of hoarfrost. It looks like a work of silver filigree, frozen in time. He sees the tracks of a small mammal, perhaps a vole or a field mouse, a series of tiny, delicate indentations in the snow that disappear into a hole beneath a fallen branch. He finds himself fascinated by the geometry of the tracks, the way they tell a story of a life lived in the shadows of the great forest. The air remains perfectly still. The only movement is the slow, swirling plume of his breath, which trails behind him like a silken ribbon. He feels the warmth of his body radiating outward, meeting the inner lining of his cloak. He is a closed system, a pocket of Roman order in the wild, chaotic beauty of the northern winter. The walls of the castrum loom ahead, their gray stones looking solid and eternal against the pale sky. He sees the smoke rising from the various hearths within the camp, thin, vertical columns of gray that disappear into the clouds. It is the smoke of breakfast fires, of warming rooms, of the thousands of mundane tasks that sustain the life of the legion. He reaches the gate. The sentry is still there, a silent statue in a thick wool cloak. As Lucius approaches, the sentry shifts his weight, the iron rings of his larica hamata making a soft, metallic chink-chink sound. They do not speak. There is no need for words in the profound silence of the dawn. Lucius passes through the gateway, leaving the wild river behind and re-entering the world of the camp. The ground here is harder, the snow packed down by the passage of 1,000 boots. He feels the change in the air. It is slightly warmer here, shielded by the walls, and it carries the heavy, comforting sense of oatmeal and roasting grain. He walks toward his barracks, his pace steady and unhurried, his mind as clear and calm as the frozen surface of a mountain lake. Lucius reaches the heavy timber door of the barracks, the wood silvered by the frost and the relentless passage of seasons on the frontier. He pauses for a moment, his hand resting on the iron latch. The iron is no longer the biting, searing cold of the outdoor air. It has begun to absorb a hint of the warmth radiating from within the building, a subtle transition that he feels through the calloused skin of his palm. He presses down on the latch. The mechanism moves with a heavy, satisfying thud click, the sound of well-maintained metal sliding against metal. He pushes the door open, and a wave of thick, aromatic warmth washes over him, a physical presence that seems to embrace him as he steps across the threshold. The transition from the sharp, ozonic air of the riverbank to the interior atmosphere of the contubernium is profound. The air here is a rich tapestry of scents, each layer telling a story of the morning's routine. There is the base note of the smoldering oak and beechwood in the central hearth, a deep, resinous smoke that has a sweet, earthy quality. Above that is the scent of drying wool, as his comrades' cloaks hang near the heat, releasing the faint, musk-like aroma of the sheep they once belonged to. Finally, there is the sharp, clean scent of vinegar and the hearty, nutty fragrance of roasting grain. It is the smell of home, even if home is a stone-walled room on the edge of the world. He moves toward his designated space with a slow, rhythmic gait. The floor of the barracks is made of packed earth and gravel, seasoned over time into a hard, dark surface that reflects the dim light of the oil lamps. His hobnailed boots make a muted tamp, tamp, tamp on the floor, a sound that is domestic and grounded. He reaches his wooden stool, a simple, sturdy construction of ash wood. He runs his hand over the seat. The wood is worn smooth by years of use, the grain forming intricate, swirling patterns that look like the topographical maps of a mountain range. He sits, feeling the solid support of the timber beneath him. The room is quiet. His tent mates are moving with the same practiced, low-energy deliberation. One is sitting on his bunk, methodically unrolling a bandage to check a minor scrape. Another is leaning over a small table, sharpening a lead stylus. The sounds are minute. The zip of the linen bandage, the scritch-scritch of the stylus against a whetstone. These sounds do not disrupt the silence. They weave into it, creating a hypnotic backdrop of communal industry. Lucius prepares to make his morning pools, the thick, sustaining grain porridge that fuels the legion. He reaches into his kit and retrieves a small, blackened iron pot. The pot is heavy and honest, its surface textured with the marks of the blacksmith's hammer. He holds it for a moment, feeling its weight and its coldness. He then moves toward the communal hearth in the center of the room. The fire is a low, pulsing mound of orange embers, occasionally flickering with a small blue flame as a pocket of gas escapes from the wood. He places the pot on a small iron tripod over the heat. The sound of the pot settling onto the metal is a clear, resonant clink. Next, he reaches for his leather grain sack. The leather is supple and dark, smelling of the granary, a dry, dusty scent of harvested fields. He unties the cord, the hemp fibers making a soft rasp as they loosen. He reaches inside and scoops out a handful of emmer wheat. The grains are small, hard, and golden brown. He lets them trickle through his fingers back into the bag. The sound is like dry rain, a patter, patter, patter that is incredibly soothing. He feels the smooth, hard surface of each individual kernel, a tiny package of stored sun and earth. He measures out exactly 2 handfuls into the iron pot. He adds water from his ceramic pitcher. The water hits the dry grain and the hot iron with a sudden, soft hiss, followed by a rhythmic glug, glug, glug as the pot fills. He watches the grains dance in the rising water, some floating to the surface before slowly sinking as they absorb the moisture. He takes a long wooden spoon, carved from a branch of olive wood he brought from his last posting in the south. The spoon is smooth and slightly oily to the touch. He begins to stir. The act of stirring the pools is a study in patience. He moves the spoon in slow, clockwise circles, around and across, around and across. He listens to the sound, the schlup, schlop of the water and grain, the soft thud of the spoon hitting the side of the iron pot. He watches the steam begin to rise. At first, it is a thin, wispy vapor, but as the water heats, it becomes a thick, white column that smells of toasted bread and wet earth. The steam carries the heat of the fire to his face, warming his cheeks and softening the lingering chill in his beard. As the porridge simmers, Lucius takes the opportunity to perform the daily maintenance of his equipment. He reaches for his gladius, the short sword that is the symbol of his profession. He draws it from its scabbard with a slow, sliding motion. The sound is a long, metallic SSSSSing, a clean and bright noise that speaks of well-oiled steel. He lays the blade across his knees, the polished surface reflecting the orange glow of the hearth. There is no blood on this blade, no nicks from combat. It is a tool of potential kept in a state of perfect, quiet readiness. He takes a small piece of soft deer hide and a jar of clarified animal fat mixed with a drop of cedar oil. He dips the leather into the fat, the substance thick and translucent, like honey. He begins to apply it to the blade. He works from the hilt to the tip. His hand moves in a long, steady stroke. The friction of the leather against the steel creates a faint, singing vibration. He feels the smoothness of the metal, the way the oil fills the microscopic pores of the steel, creating a protective barrier against the damp northern air. He repeats the motion over and over until the blade is coated in a thin, shimmering film. The smell of the cedar oil is sharp and clean, cutting through the heavier scents of the barracks. It is a scent of preservation, of order, of a man taking care of the things that take care of him. He turns the blade over and repeats the process on the other side. He is mesmerized by the way the light plays on the oiled steel. The orange of the fire and the gray of the morning light outside meet on the surface of the sword, creating a shifting, liquid landscape of color. He spends a long time on the hilt, cleaning the grooves of the bone grip with a small, pointed stick. He feels the texture of the bone, the slight grain, the coolness of the material. Every movement is deliberate. Every second is accounted for in this slow, meditative ritual of care. The pools is now thickening. The water has been mostly absorbed and the grain has softened into a dense, creamy mass. He returns his focus to the pot. He stirs it again, the resistance of the porridge now greater against the spoon. The sound has changed to a heavy, rhythmic glup, glup, glup as bubbles of steam burst through the surface. He adds a pinch of salt from a small wooden box. The salt is coarse and gray, harvested from the salt pans of the coast. He watches the crystals disappear into the porridge, a tiny transformation that he finds strangely satisfying. He lifts the pot from the fire using a thick piece of folded leather to protect his hand. He carries it back to his stool, the weight of the iron and the food a comforting presence in his grip. He sets it down on the wooden table, the heat of the pot creating a faint, toasted scent from the ash wood. He takes a small wooden bowl and transfers the porridge into it. The steam rises in a thick cloud, momentarily obscuring his vision, wrapping him in a warm, grainy fog. He eats slowly. He uses a small horn spoon, the material translucent and amber-colored. Each mouthful is warm and substantial. He feels the heat of the food traveling down his throat, spreading out from his chest to his extremities. He tastes the simple, honest flavors, the nuttiness of the wheat, the sharpness of the salt, the faint smokiness from the hearth. It is a monotonous meal, the same meal he has eaten for 1,000 mornings. And yet, in the heart of this frozen winter, it is a luxury beyond measure. He focuses entirely on the sensation of eating, the texture of the grain against his tongue, the warmth of the bowl in his hands, the rhythmic movement of his jaw. Outside, the wind begins to pick up slightly, a low, mournful sigh that brushes against the stone walls of the barracks. Inside, the world remains still. The fire continues to pulse, the shadows dance on the rafters, and the slow, steady business of the morning continues. Lucius finishes his meal, scraping the last of the porridge from the bowl with the horn spoon. The sound is a soft, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. He feels full, warm, and profoundly settled. He takes his water cup and takes a long, slow sip. The water is cool now, a pleasant contrast to the hot porridge. He looks at his reflection in the water, a man of the Legion, his face lined by the wind and the sun, his eyes calm and clear. He feels a sense of deep, unshakable peace. The world outside may be a wilderness of ice and shadow, but here, within these walls, there is warmth, there is order, and there is the slow, beautiful monotony of a life lived one breath, one step, and one stir of the pot at a time. He sets the cup down. He reaches for his whetstone, a small gray rectangle of fine-grained slate. He picks up his Pugio, the dager, and begins to draw the edge of the blade across the stone. Swish, swish, swish. The sound is a hypnotic, metallic whisper that fills the small space around him. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting the rhythm of the sharpening take over his senses. He is no longer in the north. He is nowhere and everywhere, lost in the pure, vibrating frequency of the stone and the steel. Lucius reaches beneath his bunk to retrieve the heavy, iron-bound chest that holds his most substantial piece of equipment, the Larica hamata. The chest is made of thick planks of seasoned oak, darkened by age and the smoke of the barracks. As he pulls it out, The wood makes a low, grinding "ar-ra-rumph" sound against the packed earth floor, a vibration he feels in his very bones. The iron hinges of the chest, though well-maintained, give a tiny, high-pitched eek as he lifts the lid, a sound that is sharp and crystalline in the quiet of the morning. Inside, the armor sits in a coiled, heavy mass, looking like the shed skin of a great metallic serpent. He reaches in and grasps the armor. It is a staggering weight, nearly 30 pounds of interlocking iron rings, cold and unyielding. As he lifts it, the sound is unlike any other in the legionary's world, a cascading, liquid chink-chink-chink-chink, as thousands of tiny circles of metal slide over and against one another. It is a metallic waterfall, a shimmering curtain of sound that seems to fill the small space of the contubernium. He carries the mass to his wooden table, the weight pulling at his shoulders, a familiar and grounding burden. He lays it out with careful deliberation. The Larica hamada does not simply lie flat, it settles. It spreads across the ashwood surface like a heavy, dark liquid, filling the indentations and following the contours of the table. Lucius spends several minutes simply smoothing it out, his palms moving in slow, rhythmic sweeps over the cold iron. He feels the texture of the weave, a complex pattern where each individual ring is interlocked with 4 others. Some rings are solid, punched from a sheet of iron. Others are closed with a tiny, microscopic rivet. He runs his thumb over a single row of these riveted rings, feeling the minute, rounded bumps of the iron pins. They are smooth, yet provide a subtle, tactile resistance to his touch. The light from the high vent in the wall catches the edges of the rings. It is a soft, diffused light that turns the iron into a landscape of gray and silver. He notices the way the shadows pool in the center of each ring, tiny, perfect circles of darkness that create a hypnotic, honeycomb pattern across the entire garment. He begins the process of inspection. This is a task that cannot be rushed. It is the slow, methodical census of 30,000 individual pieces of metal. He begins at the left shoulder. He takes a small, pointed iron probe and a soft brush made of horsehair. He moves the probe through the first row of rings, checking for any signs of the Red Death, the rust that can eat through a soldier's protection in the damp northern climate. The sound of the probe clicking against the iron is a rhythmic tick, 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 like the heartbeat of a mechanical clock. He listens for the sound of health, a clear, ringing ping. If a ring were cracked or weakened, it would give a dull, hollow thud. He hears only the ping. As he works, the smell of the armor begins to rise, disturbed by his touch. It is a heavy, metallic scent, sharp and industrial, mixed with the lingering aroma of the old oil and the faint, salty tang of his own past exertions. It is a clean smell in its own way, the scent of readiness. He takes a piece of soft, gray linen, heavily impregnated with a mixture of linseed oil and beeswax. The cloth is slightly tacky to the touch, and it smells sweetly of the fields and the hive, a pleasant counterpoint to the harsh scent of the iron. He begins to oil the armor. He does not simply wipe it, he massages the oil into the weave. He works in small, circular motions, focusing on a section no larger than the palm of his hand. He watches the oil transform the metal. The dull, matte gray of the dry iron deepens into a rich, lustrous black silver. The oil fills the gaps between the rings, creating a thin, protective film that catches the light and turns it into a shimmering, liquid glow. The sound of the oiled cloth moving over the rings is a soft, rhythmic hiss-swish, a sound like the wind moving through long grass. He is mesmerized by the geometry of the work. He follows the lines of the weave, his eyes tracing the path of a single ring as it disappears beneath its neighbors and then emerges again. It is a study in interconnectedness. Each ring is small, seemingly insignificant on its own, yet together they form a barrier that can stop the thrust of a Germanic spear or the edge of a Gallic sword. He thinks about the armorer who made this, a man in a dark, heat-drenched workshop in Italia or Gaul, sitting for weeks on end, closing ring after ring with a small hammer and a steady hand. Lucius feels a quiet kinship with that unknown craftsman, two men separated by years and miles, both engaged in the slow, repetitive labor of maintenance and creation. The morning progresses with a glacial pace. The shadows on the floor of the barracks shift by mere inches. Outside, the world remains locked in its icy silence, the only sound the occasional crump of snow falling from a roof or the distant, muffled call of a sentry. Inside, Lucius is lost in the world of the rings. He has finished the left shoulder and is now moving across the chest. He spends a long time on the reinforced mantle that covers the upper back and shoulders. Here, the rings are doubled, creating a dense, heavy layer of protection. He feels the increased resistance as he works the oil into the double weave, the sound of the cloth becoming deeper and more resonant. He finds a single ring that is slightly bent, its shape distorted by some forgotten impact or the sheer weight of the garment. He pauses. He takes a small pair of iron pliers, their handles wrapped in thin leather for grip. He grasps the ring with the tips of the pliers. The metal is stubborn, holding its shape with the tenacity of cold-forged iron. He applies a slow, steady pressure. He feels the metal yield, a tiny, microscopic give that he perceives through the handles of the tool. He adjusts the ring until its circle is perfect once more, mirroring its neighbors. He sets the pliers down with a soft clink. The satisfaction he feels is immense, a small piece of the world returned to its proper order. He continues his work row by row, ring by ring. The repetition is profoundly hypnotic. The tick of the probe, the hiss of the cloth, the chink of the metal, it becomes a symphony of the mundane. His breathing slows, matching the rhythm of his hands. He is no longer Lucius the soldier, a man on the edge of a vast and dangerous frontier. He is simply the caretaker of the iron. The weight of his responsibilities, the cold of the winter, the distance from home, all of it fades away, replaced by the immediate tactile reality of the larica hamata. He reaches the hem of the garment. The rings here are often the most neglected, being furthest from the eyes. He lifts the edge of the armor, feeling the way it drapes over his hand like a heavy metallic fabric. It is cold against his skin, but the oil he has applied has already begun to take on his body heat, creating a strange, lukewarm sensation. He cleans each of the bottom rings with the same care he gave to the chest. He notices the tiny scratches on the metal, the record of marches through brush and stone. Each mark is a memory, smoothed over now by the protective layer of oil. The armor is now fully oiled. It lies on the table, a shimmering, dark sea of iron. It looks different than it did an hour ago. It looks alive, vibrant, and ready. Lucius takes a clean, dry piece of wool and begins the final buffing. This is the lightest part of the task. He lets the wool glide over the surface, picking up any excess oil and polishing the rings to a dull, honest sheen. The sound is a fast, rhythmic frip frip frip, a cheerful and busy noise that signals the end of the chore. He stands back and looks at his work. The Larica Hamada is a masterpiece of Roman engineering, and in this moment it is perfect. The light from the high vent has turned from gray to a pale, buttery yellow as the sun tries to pierce the cloud cover. The yellow light dances on the rings, creating thousands of tiny, golden reflections that sparkle like stars in a dark sky. He feels a sense of profound accomplishment. He has taken a cold, dull mass of metal and turned it into a glowing testament to his discipline. He begins the process of folding the armor back into its chest. This must be done with precision to prevent the rings from tangling or kinking. He grasps the shoulders and folds them inward, the metal making a heavy, collaborative clatter chink. He then rolls the garment from the bottom up. The roll becomes thicker and heavier with every turn, a dense cylinder of iron. He lifts the roll and places it gently into the oak chest. It settles into the straw lining with a soft, muffled thump. He lowers the lid of the chest. The thud of the wood closing is a final, definitive sound, a period at the end of a long, silent sentence. He pushes the chest back under his bunk, the rumph of the wood on the earth signaling the return of the equipment to its place of rest. He stands up, stretching his back. His joints make a series of soft, rhythmic pops, a human echo of the metallic chinks he has been listening to. He feels a deep sense of calm, his mind as orderly and polished as the armor he has just tucked away. The fire in the hearth has burned down to a steady, glowing bed of coals. The room is warm, quiet, and filled with the scent of oil and wood smoke. Lucius takes a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, slow and steady. The day is unfolding with a beautiful, boring inevitability, and he is ready for whatever small, quiet task comes next. The light in the barracks has shifted again, moving from the pale, buttery yellow of the early morning to a steady, silvery gray. It is a soft, non-committal light that fills the room without casting harsh shadows, making every object appear as if it is suspended in a state of quiet contemplation. Lucius reaches under the foot of his bunk and retrieves a heavy, rolled-up mass of dark, weathered leather. This is a section of the papilio, the butterfly tent that serves as the 8-man squad's home during the summer campaigning months. During the winter, it is disassembled, cleaned, and meticulously repaired, ensuring that when the spring thaw finally arrives, their shelter will be impenetrable to the rains of the north. He heaves the leather onto his lap. It is a substantial weight, thick and dense, made from the hides of nearly 30 calves. The leather is cold, having been stored near the outer wall, and as it settles against his wool-clad thighs, he feels the immediate heavy pressure of it. It smells strongly of the frontier, a mixture of old wood smoke, dried mud, the fatty scent of the neatsfoot oil used to keep it supple, and the lingering, earthy musk of the animals it once belonged to. He unrolls the section slowly. The leather makes a deep, protesting, creak groan, a slow, rhythmic sound like the hull of a ship moving in a gentle swell. He spreads the leather across his knees and the edge of the wooden table. He is looking for a small tier, a place where a tent peg or a jagged rock had snagged the hide during the last march of the autumn. He finds it near the reinforced hem, a jagged, L-shaped rent about 3 inches long. He runs his fingers over the edges of the tier. The leather is rough and fibrous where it has been torn, the internal structure of the hide exposed to the air. He spends a long time simply feeling the texture of the damaged area, his thumb tracing the perimeter of the hole with a slow, hypnotic regularity. From a small wooden box, he retrieves his sewing kit. He takes out a bone awl, a tool he carved himself from the femur of a deer. The bone is polished to a high, ivory-like sheen, its surface smooth and cool to the touch. It has a slight ergonomic curve that fits perfectly into the palm of his hand. He also takes out a coil of hemp thread. The thread is coarse and strong, composed of dozens of tiny fibers twisted together into a single, unyielding cord. It is the color of dried hay. Before he begins, he must wax the thread. He takes a small hexagonal cake of yellow beeswax from the box. The wax is hard and slightly tacky, smelling of summer meadows and distant hives. He holds the end of the hemp thread against the wax with his thumb and pulls the entire length through. Zip. He repeats the motion. Zip. He does this slowly, over and over again. He watches as the wax coats the fibers, smoothing down the tiny, frayed ends and turning the thread from a pale tan to a deep, translucent amber. The sound is a rhythmic, high-pitched hiss-zip, a sound that seems to vibrate through the bones of his hand. The wax builds up under his fingernail, a small, sticky residue that smells of honey and ancient sunshine. Once the thread is prepared, he begins the task of piercing the leather. This requires a steady, concentrated pressure. He positions the point of the bone all about a 1/4 inch from the edge of the tier. He pushes. The leather resists at first, its dense fibers huddling together against the intrusion. He applies more weight, a slow, downward lean of his entire torso. Then, with a sudden, muffled thuck, the awl punches through. The sound is incredibly satisfying, a deep, hollow thuck that speaks of the integrity of the material. He withdraws the awl, leaving behind a neat circular hole. He moves another 1/4 inch down and repeats the process. Push, thuck, push, thuck. He works with the regularity of a pendulum. He is not thinking about the finished repair. He is thinking only about the next hole. The thuck of the awl becomes the heartbeat of his morning, a steady, grounding rhythm that drowns out the distant, muffled noises of the fortress. He finishes the first line of holes along one side of the tier. He then prepares the second line on the opposing side, ensuring they align perfectly. This is a geometry of necessity. He looks at the 2 rows of holes, seeing them as tiny, dark eyes peering up from the surface of the leather. He takes the waxed thread and begins the first stitch. He does not use a needle. The waxed end of the thread is stiff enough to be threaded directly through the holes he has made. He pushes the thread through the first hole. It moves with a soft, sliding shhh sound, the wax acting as a lubricant against the leather. He pulls it tight. He then crosses over to the corresponding hole on the other side and pushes the thread back through. He creates a simple, robust X pattern, a cross stitch that will distribute the tension evenly across the hide. As he pulls the thread taut, he listens to the sound it makes as it bites into the leather. It is a low-frequency creak snap, the sound of a ship's rigging under a light breeze. He feels the tension in his fingers, the way the thread resists just enough to let him know it is holding. He moves to the next pair of holes, thread, slide, pull, creak, thread, slide, pull, creak. The repetition is profoundly hypnotic. The world around him begins to blur. The stone walls of the barracks, the smoldering fire in the hearth, the breathing of his comrades, all of it recedes until there is only the leather, the awl, and the thread. He notices the minute details of the leather's surface, the tiny, microscopic pores of the skin, the way the neatsfoot oil has darkened the areas around the holes, the faint, silvery scar where a briar once scratched the animal years ago. He finds himself wondering about that animal, where it grazed, the cold mountain air it breathed, the grass it ate. He feels a quiet, wordless gratitude for the protection its hide now provides. He reaches the corner of the L-shaped tier. This is the most difficult part of the repair, requiring a change in the direction of the stitches. He takes his time, adjusting the leather on his lap. He feels the weight of it shifting, the cool, smooth underside of the hide brushing against his hands. He makes the turn with a series of smaller, tighter stitches, creating a reinforced knot of hemp and leather that looks like a tiny, intricate braid. The smell of the beeswax is stronger now, warmed by the friction of his hands and the heat of his body. It fills his nostrils with a sweet, heavy scent that contrasts with the sharp, metallic tang of the armor he cleaned earlier. It is a comforting, domestic smell. He finds himself breathing more deeply, his chest rising and falling in time with the movement of his hands. Push, thuck, thread, creak. The light from the vent has moved further across the floor, illuminating a patch of the packed earth and a few stray pieces of straw. The dust motes dance in the shaft of light, moving in slow, lazy spirals. Lucius watches them for a moment, fascinated by their weightless journey through the air. They seem to embody the very essence of the morning, slow, aimless, and perfectly content. He returns to his work. He is halfway through the second leg of the tier. He notices that his thread is running low. He does not rush to finish. He stops, ties off the current thread with a neat double-looped knot, and begins the process of preparing a new length of hemp. He cuts the thread with his small iron knife, the blade making a clean, dry snip. He waxes the new thread, the hiss-zip sound once again filling the air. He enjoys the interruption. It is a change in the rhythm that makes him appreciate the main task all the more. He continues the stitching. Each X is a small victory against the chaos of the world. In a life defined by the vast movements of empires and the brutal unpredictability of the frontier, this 3-inch repair is something he can control entirely. It is a small piece of order that he is creating with his own hands, one stitch at a time. The leather feels warmer now, having absorbed the heat from his legs. It has become a part of him, a heavy, protective extension of his own skin. As he nears the end of the tier, he slows down even further. He wants to savor the final few stitches. He looks at the work he has done. The jagged rent is now gone, replaced by a beautiful, rhythmic pattern of amber thread. It looks like a decorative scar, a mark of resilience. He pushes the awl through the final hole. Thuck. He threads the hemp through one last time. Slide. He pulls it tight. Creak. He ties the final knot with a series of intricate loops, ensuring it will never come undone. He takes his knife and trims the excess thread, leaving a tiny, neat tail. He runs his hand over the repaired area. It is smooth, strong, and completely sealed. He can feel the slight ridges of the thread under his fingertips, a tactile record of his labor. He spends several minutes simply smoothing the leather down, his palms moving in long, circular motions over the entire section of the tent. The task is finished, but he is in no hurry to move. He sits there with the heavy leather on his lap, listening to the silence of the barracks. The fire has burned down even further, the orange glow replaced by a layer of soft, white ash. The air is still and warm. He feels a sense of profound completion, a quiet satisfaction that radiates from his core. He has fulfilled his duty to the squad, to the Legion, and to himself. He begins to roll the leather back up. The creak groan of the hide is more muted now, as if the tent flap itself is satisfied with the repair. He rolls it tightly, creating a neat, dense cylinder. He lifts it, a heavy, honest weight, and carries it back to its storage place beneath the bunk. As he slides it in, the rumph of the leather against the earth is a final, concluding note to the task. He stands up and stretches, his arms reaching toward the rafters. He feels the pull of the muscles in his back and shoulders, a pleasant ache of productivity. The day remains gray, cold, and beautifully monotonous. He looks around the room, seeing his comrades still engaged in their own quiet rituals. The world is at peace, held in the frozen, crystalline grip of the northern winter. Lucius takes a slow, deep breath, tasting the beeswax and the wood smoke, and waits for the next small, meaningful moment to arrive. The silver light of the late morning has reached a state of crystalline stasis. It does not seem to move across the floor of the barracks anymore. Rather, it permeates the very air, turning the suspended dust motes into a slow-motion galaxy of silent, drifting stars. Lucius remains seated on his ashwood stool, his body adjusted to the subtle contours of the timber. He feels a deep, skeletal stillness. The previous tasks, the bath, the armor, the leatherwork, have layered upon one another, creating a foundation of quietude that allows him to sink deeper into the meditative rhythm of the day. He reaches once more into the shadows beneath his bunk. This time, he retrieves a small, square box made of dark, aromatic cedar. The wood is old and has been rubbed with so much oil over the years that it possesses a deep, inner glow, like a piece of fossilized amber. As he pulls it toward him, the base of the box makes a soft, dry shh against the earth floor. He lifts the box and places it on the table. It has a simple bronze latch, green with a delicate patina of age. He hooks his thumb under the latch and lifts. The sound is a tiny, musical tink, followed by the muffled thud of the heavy lid falling back against its hinges. Inside the box lies a mountain of iron. These are the clavicaligares, the hobnails that provide the Roman legion with its literal and metaphorical grip on the world. There are hundreds of them, a chaotic jumble of square-shanked, faceted heads. They are the color of a stormy sea, a dark, matte gray that seems to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Lucius looks at them for a long moment. To an outsider, they are merely supplies. To a soldier, they are the difference between a steady march and a disastrous slip on a frozen mountain pass. He prepares the workspace. He takes a piece of heavy linen and spreads it across the table. The fabric is rough, its weave thick and visible, providing a soft, cushioned stage for the metallic work to come. He then grasps the cedar box with both hands and slowly, with a deliberation that borders on the ritualistic, he begins to pour the nails out onto the cloth. The sound is a magnificent, cascading symphony of metal. It begins as a few stray clinks, like the first drops of a summer rain on a tin roof. Then, as the bulk of the nails slide out, it becomes a continuous, rushing, clatter-chink jingle. It is a heavy, resonant sound, filled with the weight of the iron. The nails tumble over one another, their faceted heads striking and sliding, creating a metallic liquid motion. Lucius watches as they form a gray, jagged pile in the center of the linen. When the last nail falls, the silence that follows is even deeper than before, punctuated only by the fading vibration of the table. He begins the sorting. This is the heart of the task, the slow, monotonous inspection of every individual piece of iron. He reaches into the pile and selects a single nail. He holds it between his thumb and forefinger. The nail is cold, a sharp, piercing chill that he feels in the very tips of his nerves. He examines the head. It is a small pyramid of iron, four-sided and blunt, designed to bite into the earth. He looks for any sign of a flaw, a crack in the shank, a rounding of the facets, or the dreaded orange bloom of rust. The nail is perfect. He feels the texture of the iron. It is not smooth like the polished sword, but slightly grainy, a testament to the sand-casting process. He runs his fingernail over one of the edges. The sound is a minute, high-pitched scritch. He places the nail in a new pile to his right. The sound of the nail hitting the wooden table through the linen is a soft, muffled clack. He selects another. This one has a tiny, microscopic burr of metal on the shank. He takes a small, fine-grained file, a slender sliver of steel with a wooden handle, and begins to remove the imperfection. He holds the nail firmly and draws the file across the iron. Zip, zip, zip. The sound is a dry, rhythmic rasp, like a cricket in a dry field. He watches as a tiny puff of gray iron dust falls onto the linen. He blows it away, the dust spiraling into the air before vanishing. He runs his finger over the spot. It is now smooth. He places the nail in the good pile. Clack. The process continues. Select, inspect, place, clack. He finds himself falling into a trance. The rhythm of his hand moving from the central pile to the good pile becomes as natural as his breathing. He begins to notice the subtle differences between the nails. Though they were all made to the same specification, each has its own character. Some have heads that are slightly taller. Others have shanks that are a fraction thicker. He appreciates these minute variations, the thumbprints of the various blacksmiths across the empire who hammered these into existence. He thinks of the heat of the forge, the rhythmic clang-clang-clang of the hammer, the smell of charred coal and hot metal. Here, in the freezing stillness of the north, that heat seems like a distant, beautiful dream. He reaches a nail that is different. It is coated in a thin, stubborn layer of reddish-brown rust. He does not discard it. Iron is too precious on the frontier to be wasted. He takes a small jar of heavy grease, rendered pig fat mixed with a pinch of powdered charcoal. It is thick, black, and smells of wood smoke and salt. He dips a small, stiff-bristled brush into the grease and begins to scrub the nail. The sound is a wet, rhythmic squish-scrub, squish-scrub. He works the grease into the facets of the nail head, the charcoal acting as a mild abrasive. He watches as the orange rust is slowly smothered by the black grease, dissolved and lifted away. He then takes a scrap of wool and wipes the nail clean. The iron emerges from beneath the grime, looking dark and rejuvenated. He feels the slickness of the grease on his own fingers, a heavy, waterproof coating that makes his skin feel warm. He places the restored nail in the pile. Clack. The pile to his right grows slowly, a rising mountain of gray certainty. The pile in the center diminishes with the same glacial pace. Lucius is not looking at the time. He is looking at the iron. He notices how the silvery light from the vent catches the facets of the sordid nails, creating 1,000 tiny, shimmering points of light. It looks like a treasure hoard, a collection of humble jewels that buy the Legion its mobility. A companion in the barracks, a man named Marcus, walks past on his way to the door. His footsteps are a slow, rhythmic thump crunch on the earth. He pauses by Lucius's table, looking down at the pile of nails. He doesn't say a word. He simply reaches out and picks up one of the sordid nails, feels its weight and its sharpness, and nods slowly. The nod is a silent communication, an acknowledgement of the necessity of the work. He sets the nail back down with a gentle clink and continues on his way. The door opens, letting in a brief, sharp whistle of the winter wind and a flash of white light, before closing with a heavy thud. The interruption only serves to deepen Lucius's focus. He returns to the nails. He is now halfway through. He begins to count them not out of necessity but as another layer of rhythmic discipline. 51, 52, 53. The numbers are a silent chant in his mind, a mathematical heartbeat. He finds the repetition of the numbers to be incredibly soothing, a way to anchor his consciousness in the present moment. The air in the barracks is cooling as the fire in the hearth dies down to a bed of glowing embers. Lucius feels the chill beginning to creep around his ankles, but he does not move to stoke the fire. He welcomes the cold. It keeps his mind sharp and his hands steady. He feels the contrast between the freezing iron of the nails and the warmth of his own blood. He feels the texture of the linen cloth, the way it has become slightly damp from the oil and the humidity of his breath. He picks up a nail that is unusually heavy. He holds it up to the light. It is a master nail, one of the larger ones used for the heel of the boot. Its facets are deep and sharp, its shank thick and unyielding. He spends a long time looking at it, tracing the lines of its construction. It is a perfect object, a masterpiece of utility. He feels a sense of profound satisfaction in its existence. He places it at the very peak of the good pile, a silent king of the Iron Mountain. The morning has bled into the afternoon. The light in the room has turned a deeper, more melancholic gray, the color of wet slate. The dust motes have settled, their dance finished for the day. Lucius reaches the final few nails in the central pile. He selects them one by one, giving them the same meticulous attention he gave to the first. Inspect, wipe, place, clack. The last nail is a small, slightly crooked one. He spends a few minutes straightening it with his pliers, the metal making a soft, protesting creak. He oils it, wipes it, and places it on the pile. The task is finished. He sits for a moment, looking at the result of his labor. The pile of sorted nails is a beautiful, orderly thing. It represents hours of focus, of care, of the slow and steady application of will against the entropy of the world. He feels a deep sense of peace, a quietude that fills his chest and moves out to his extremities. The world outside may be a vast, frozen wilderness, but here, on this table, there is order. He begins to put the nails back into the cedar box. He does not pour them this time. He takes them in small handfuls, letting them slide from his palm into the box. The sound is a series of soft, metallic whispers, a muted version of the clatter from earlier. S-H-H-H-H-chink. S-H-H-H-H-chink. He watches as the box fills up, the gray iron rising toward the rim. He uses his fingers to level the nails, the metal feeling cold and fluid like a bowl of frozen beads. He closes the lid. The thud of the wood is soft and final. He engages the bronze latch. Tink. He picks up the cedar box, feeling its substantial, honest weight. He carries it back to its place beneath the bunk, the S-H-H-H-H of the wood against the earth signaling the end of the ritual. He stands up and stretches, his bones echoing the clacks of the nails. He walks to the hearth and adds a single, thick log of oak to the embers. He watches as the heat begins to lick at the wood, the smoke rising in a slow, gray spiral. He feels warm, he feels tired, and he feels perfectly, beautifully bored. The light from the high, narrow vents of the barracks has begun its slow, inevitable transition into the blue hour. This is the time when the sun, though hidden behind the perpetual veil of northern clouds, sinks low enough that the world outside loses its definition, dissolving into a landscape of deep indigos and slate shadows. Inside, the barracks feel smaller, more intimate. The air has grown heavier, cooled by the encroaching night, yet held in check by the steady, pulsing warmth of the central hearth. Lucius feels the shift in the atmosphere, a thickening of the silence, a deepening of the peace. It is the time of the final preparations before the transition to the night watch. He stands and moves toward the wooden peg where his pinula, the heavy, hooded traveling cloak, is suspended. The cloak is a monumental garment, a vast semicircle of thick, shaggy wool known as gausapa. It has been hanging there since his return from the river, and as he reaches out to touch it, he finds that the dampness of the morning has been replaced by a stiff, cold dryness. The fabric is heavy, weighing nearly as much as a small animal, and as he lifts it from the peg, it makes a deep, muffled whump-fuff sound. He carries it back to his stool and drapes it over the wooden table, where it spreads out like a dark, woolly landscape. The pinula is more than just clothing. It is a soldier's portable home. It has been his blanket on frozen ground, his shield against the horizontal rains of the Germanic plains, and his sanctuary during long, silent hours of sentry duty. He runs his hand over the surface of the wool. It is incredibly coarse, a rugged, honest material designed for survival rather than comfort. The fibers are long and dense, woven so tightly that they form a natural barrier against the wind. He feels the texture under his palm, a rhythmic, bumpy landscape of woolen tufts. It smells of the Legion, a complex, layered aroma of old woodsmoke, the fatty scent of lanolin, the sharpness of cedar oil, and a faint, lingering trace of the river's ozonic chill. He begins the process of cleaning. This is a task of patience and sensory focus. He retrieves a heavy brush from his kit, the handle carved from a piece of dark, polished horn, and the bristles made from the stiff, wiry hair of a wild boar. The brush feels substantial in his hand, its weight balanced and grounding. He starts at the collar of the cloak where the wool is most compressed. He draws the brush down the length of the fabric. The sound is a magnificent, rhythmic scritch, scritch, scritch. It is a dry, rasping noise that seems to vibrate through the table and into his own arms. He watches as the bristles catch on the fibers, lifting the microscopic particles of dust and the dried, powdery remnants of the morning's mud. The debris falls onto the dark wood of the table like a fine, earthy snow. He works with a slow, deliberate cadence, 3 strokes down, a pause to shake the brush, then 3 strokes again. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Pause. A scritch, scritch, scritch. He focuses on a specific area near the hem that had been splashed by the river. The mud here has dried into a pale, brittle crust. He applies a bit more pressure, the sound of the brush deepening into a more resonant grrrrr rich. He watches as the crust breaks apart, turning into small, gray grains that roll across the table. He is fascinated by the way the wool beneath the mud is revealed, vibrant and clean, its dark gray color standing out against the surrounding dust. He spends a long time on this one section, his world narrowing down to the movement of the bristles and the slow disappearance of the stain. It is a quiet, meditative victory over the elements. The air in the barracks is now filled with the faint, dry scent of disturbed wool and earth. It is a clean, honest smell. Lucius pauses to stoke the fire, adding a thick branch of birch wood. The wood is cold and has a few silvery curls of bark. As he places it on the embers, it makes a soft clink thud. He waits for a moment, watching as a tiny, orange flame begins to lick at the edges of the bark. The birch bark curls and blackens with a rhythmic crackle pop, releasing a sweet, medicinal scent that blends with the aroma of the wool. He returns to his cloak, the flickering light of the new flame dancing across the shaggy fibers. Next comes the waterproofing. Even the best woven wool can eventually become heavy and sodden in a prolonged northern downpour. To prevent this, the legionary must periodically replenish the natural oils of the fabric. Lucius takes a small ceramic jar from his kit. The jar is unglazed, its surface cool and slightly gritty. He removes the cork stopper with a soft pop. Inside is a thick, translucent paste made from rendered sheep's fat and a few drops of pine resin. It is the color of old ivory and has a heavy, waxy consistency. He scoops a small amount of the paste onto his fingertips. It is cold at first, a thick, greasy weight, but as he rubs his fingers together, the heat of his body begins to melt it. It becomes a slick, shimmering oil. He begins to apply it to the shoulders and the hood of the pinula, the areas most exposed to the sky. He works the oil into the wool with slow, circular motions of his palms. The sensation is profoundly tactile. He feels the coarse wool softening under the oil, the fibers becoming supple and dark. The sound of his hands moving over the fabric changes from the dry scritch of the brush to a soft, rhythmic shhh lush. Shhh lush. It is the sound of saturation, of protection being applied. He watches as the light from the hearth catches the newly oiled sections, turning the matte gray wool into a rich, lustrous charcoal that glimmers with a liquid sheen. The smell of the pine resin is released by the friction of his hands. It is a sharp, invigorating scent, the smell of the deep forest, of ancient trees standing tall against the winter. It fills his senses, clearing his mind and anchoring him even further in the present moment. He spends an eternity on the hood, ensuring the oil reaches deep into the seams where the heavy wool is joined. He feels the thickness of the material, the way it resists and then accepts the oil. He thinks of the rain that will hit this hood, how the droplets will bead up and roll away, unable to penetrate the barrier he is creating. As he works, he notices his own hands. They are reddened by the cold and the labor, the skin lined with the marks of a soldier's life. The oil fills the lines of his palms, making them shine in the dim light. He feels a sense of kinship with his equipment. His skin and the wool of the cloak are both being treated, both being prepared to face the indifference of the northern night. There is a profound, quiet dignity in this preparation. He is not merely cleaning a garment. He is maintaining the boundary between himself and the wild. The blue hour outside has deepened into a true, velvety darkness. The vents in the wall are now squares of deep obsidian, occasionally flecked with a stray, drifting snowflake. The barracks are quiet, the only sounds being the rhythmic shhh-lush of Lucius's hands, the occasional crackle of the birch branch in the fire, and the steady, heavy breathing of a comrade sleeping in a nearby bunk. The world has contracted to this small circle of warmth and the task at hand. He finishes the oiling. The pinula lies on the table, a heavy, dark, and shimmering presence. It looks ready. It looks invincible. Lucius takes a clean piece of linen and performs a final, light buffing, the fabric sliding over the oiled wool with a soft, rhythmic zip-zip-zip. He removes any excess oil, leaving behind only a thin, protective film that smells of the forest. He lifts the cloak from the table. It is heavier now, the oil and the deep cleaning having added a perceptible density to the fabric. He turns it over, checking the inner lining, a softer, felted wool that rests against the tunic. It is clean and dry, a warm contrast to the rugged exterior. He begins the process of folding. Folding a pinula is a slow, structural exercise. He folds the hood inward first, the wool making a soft, muffled thump. Then he folds the sides, creating a long, narrow rectangle. Finally, he rolls it from the bottom up. The roll becomes a thick, heavy cylinder, a concentrated essence of warmth and protection. He ties the roll with a pair of leather thongs, the knots pulling tight with a soft, rhythmic creak. He places the rolled cloak at the head of his bunk. It will serve as his pillow for a short time before the horn sounds for the evening watch. He sits back down on his stool, his hands still feeling the slick, warm residue of the pine oil. He looks at the fire, which has now settled into a steady, golden glow. The birch wood has been consumed, replaced by a bed of glowing coals that pulse with a slow, internal light. He feels a sense of profound, rhythmic completion. Every piece of his equipment, his boots, his armor, his sword, his tent, and now his cloak, has been tended to. He has moved through the day with a deliberate, hypnotic slowness, turning the mundane tasks of survival into a sequence of meditative rituals. The cold of the river this morning seems like a distant memory, a sharp punctuation mark at the beginning of a long, beautiful sentence of boredom. He takes a slow, deep breath, tasting the pine and the wood smoke. He feels the weight of his own body, the solidity of the stool, the warmth of the room. He is ready for the night. He is ready for the silence of the watch. He is ready for the slow turning of the winter stars. The deep, indigo silence of the winter evening has fully descended upon the castrum, and the barracks have become a realm of flickering shadows and steady, rhythmic warmth. The high vents in the stone walls no longer admit even a suggestion of light. They are merely black voids through which the biting breath of the north occasionally whispers, carrying the faint, metallic scent of distant snow. Lucius sits for a long, quiet moment on the edge of his bunk, his hands resting on his knees. He feels the density of the air, the way the heat from the hearth seems to have become a thick, invisible blanket that has settled over the room. He listens to the soft, crackling sigh of the fire as it consumes the last of the oak log, the sound a gentle, hypnotic pop hiss that punctuates the stillness. The transition from the meditative tasks of the day to the active duty of the night watch begins with a single, deep breath. He feels his lungs expand, the warm, wood-scented air filling his chest with a slow, internal pressure. It is time to don the layers of his profession. He reaches for his subarmales, the heavy, padded garment that serves as the essential cushion between his wool tunic and the cold weight of the iron mail. The subarmales is made of multiple layers of coarse linen, quilted together with thick, vertical lines of stitching. It is a stiff, substantial thing, smelling of clean laundry and the faint, earthy scent of the hemp padding within. He pulls the garment on over his head. The sound is a muffled, rhythmic rustle slide as the linen moves against the wool of his tunic. He feels the immediate, snug embrace of the padding. It is a different kind of warmth than the cloak, more structural, more protective. He spends several minutes adjusting the fit, ensuring that the heavy seams lie flat against his shoulders. He begins to tie the leather thongs at the front. The thongs are thin and supple, made of oil-tanned goat skin. He threads the first pair of ties through the linen eyelets. The sound of the leather sliding against the fabric is a minute, high-pitched zip. He ties a neat, square knot, feeling the way the padding cinches around his torso. Zip, pull, knot. Zip, pull, knot. He repeats the motion 4 times, moving down his chest with a slow, deliberate regularity. The world feels a little more distant now, muffled by the layers of fabric. He feels the weight of the subarmales, a comforting, domestic burden that prepares his body for the more rigorous weight to come. He stands and moves toward the chest beneath his bunk once more. He lifts the lid. The creak of the hinges is a familiar, friendly sound in the quiet room. He reaches in and grasps the larica hamata, the shimmering mass of 30,000 iron rings he had cleaned and oiled earlier. Lifting the armor is a feat of focused strength. He feels the cold, heavy liquid metal weight pull at his forearms. As he raises it, the sound is a magnificent, cascading chink-chink jingle-chink, a metallic waterfall that seems to fill every corner of the contubernium. It is a sound of immense permanence. He holds the armor aloft for a moment, letting the rings settle and align. The iron catches the orange glow of the hearth, creating a shifting, liquid landscape of gold and shadow across the weave. He prepares to drape the mail over his shoulders. This is the most physically demanding part of the ritual. He ducks his head and slides the iron mass over his torso. The transition is sudden. The chink of the rings becomes a muffled thrum as the iron hits the padding of the subarmales. He feels the weight descend, a crushing 30-pound pressure that seeks to pull his shoulders down toward the earth. He does not fight it. He accepts it, shifting his feet to find a stable, grounded stance. He spends a long time adjusting the mail, pulling at the hem to ensure the rings are distributed evenly. He feels the weight shift from his shoulders to his chest, and then, as he stands straight, down through his spine to his hips. The armor is no longer a separate object. It has become a second skin, an iron exoskeleton that vibrates with every movement. He listens to the sound of his own breathing, which has become deeper and more resonant within the confines of the mail. Each inhalation causes the rings to expand and slide with a soft, rhythmic SSSSSH chink. It is a sound like the tide moving over a bed of shingle. He finds the noise incredibly soothing, a metallic heartbeat that matches his own. Next comes the cingulum militare, the heavy leather belt that signifies his status as a soldier of Rome. The belt is thick and dark, reinforced with a series of rectangular bronze plates. He wraps it around his waist over the iron mail. The leather is stiff and cool, smelling of neatsfoot oil and ancient bronze. He threads the tongue of the buckle through the hole. The sound is a sharp, definitive clack-click. He then spends several minutes adjusting the apron. The 4 long leather strips that hang from the front of the belt, each adorned with dozens of small, circular bronze studs. He runs his hand over the apron. The bronze studs are cool and smooth, like small, frozen raindrops. As he moves, the apron strips sway against his thighs, creating a rhythmic, musical tinkle-chink. It is a light, busy sound that contrasts with the deep, heavy thrum of the chainmail. He finds himself mesmerized by the interplay of the two sounds, the heavy and the light, the iron and the bronze. He checks the positioning of the belt, ensuring it sits low on his hips to take some of the weight of the armor off his shoulders. He feels the pressure of the leather cinching around him, providing a sense of core stability and readiness. He reaches for his gladius. The scabbard is made of wood covered in thin, red-dyed leather with bronze fittings that look like golden lace in the firelight. He slides the belt loop through the scabbard's ring. The sound is a soft scritch thud. He feels the weight of the sword hanging at his right side, a solid, comforting presence. He then attaches his pugio, the dagger, to the left side of his belt. The dagger is smaller, but its weight is dense and concentrated. He feels the balance of the two weapons, a symmetry of iron and wood that frames his hips. The penultimate layer is the pinula, the heavy, shaggy wool cloak he had so carefully cleaned and oiled. He lifts the roll from his bunk and unties the leather thongs. The creak of the knots loosening is a soft, satisfying sound. He shakes the cloak out. It catches the air with a deep, muffled woof, the scent of pine and lanolin suddenly intensifying in the small space. He drapes it over his shoulders. The weight is substantial, adding another 10 pounds to the burden he is already carrying, but it is a soft weight, a warm weight. He pins the cloak at his throat with the bronze fibula. The pin slides through the thick, oiled wool with a soft pop. He pulls the hood up, momentarily enclosing himself in a private, pine-scented sanctuary. The sound of the barracks is further dampened, reduced to a distant, low-frequency hum. He feels the texture of the wool against his neck. It is dense, slightly scratchy, and incredibly warm. The contrast between the cold iron of the mail beneath and the warm wool of the cloak above creates a strange, layered sensation, a thermocline of Roman engineering. Finally, he reaches for his helmet, the Gallia. It sits on a wooden stand near the door, a gleaming dome of polished iron and bronze. He picks it up, feeling its top-heavy weight. The interior is lined with a cap of soft, padded leather that smells of old sweat and cedar. He places the helmet on his head. The world changes. His vision is narrowed by the brow guard, reduced to a focused horizontal band. His hearing is altered by the large bronze cheek pieces, which capture and reflect the sounds of his own breathing. He fastens the leather chin strap. The sound of the strap tightening is a soft, rhythmic creak snap. He feels the helmet settle, the weight pressing down on the crown of his head. He shakes his head slightly to test the fit. The helmet stays perfectly in place, the iron cheek pieces brushing against his jaw with a soft, metallic clink. He is now fully encased. He is no longer a man of flesh and blood. He is a pillar of iron, wool, and leather, a machine of the state designed to endure. He moves toward his scutum, the large, semi-cylindrical shield that leans against the wall by the door. The shield is a masterpiece of plywood, linen, and leather, edged in bronze and reinforced with a heavy central boss of iron. He grasps the horizontal handle behind the boss. The grip is wrapped in thin leather, worn smooth by his palm. He lifts the shield. It is a vast, awkward weight, but he handles it with the grace of long practice. He feels the balance of it, the way it protects his entire left side from chin to knee. In his right hand, he takes his pilum, the heavy javelin. The shaft is made of seasoned ash wood, thick and straight, topped by a long, slender iron shank and a pyramidal tip. He feels the grain of the wood under his fingers. It is cool and dry with a slight, honest roughness. The weight of the pilum is forward-heavy, designed to punch through shields and armor. He holds it vertically, the iron tip almost touching the rafters. The sound of the wood butt hitting the earth floor is a deep, resonant thud. He stands by the door, fully equipped. The barracks are silent. His comrades are shadows in the gloom, there breathing the only sign of life. Lucius feels a profound sense of stillness. He is a vessel of duty, held in a state of perfect, frozen readiness. He looks at the iron latch of the door. He knows that once he pushes it, the warmth of the barracks will be a memory, replaced by the indifferent, crystalline cold of the northern night. He does not hesitate, but he does not hurry. He savors the final few seconds of the indoor air, the scent of the wood smoke and the beeswax. He presses the latch, click, he pulls the door open. A wave of freezing air rushes in, sharp and ozonic, hitting his face like a physical blow. It is a profound, cleansing shock. He steps out into the darkness. The ground is frozen hard as stone, and as his hobnailed boots strike the earth, the sound is a sharp, metallic crunch-clink that echoes off the stone walls of the fortress. The air is so cold it makes the moisture in his nose freeze instantly, a sharp, tingling sensation. He breathes out, and a massive, white plume of steam erupts from his mouth, illuminated briefly by the light from the barracks before it vanishes into the night. He walks toward the battlements, his pace slow and rhythmic. Crunch-clink, crunch-clink, crunch-clink. The sound is the only thing in the world. He feels the weight of his armor, the grip of his shield, and the sharpness of the air. The stars above are brilliant, hard points of light in a black sky, looking down with icy indifference on the edge of the empire. Lucius reaches the ladder to the ramparts. He begins the climb, his iron rings singing their liquid, metallic song with every step, as he ascends into the heart of the winter night. The final ascent to the ramparts is a study in vertical endurance. Each wooden rung of the ladder is a thick, square-hewn piece of oak, weathered by the relentless cycle of frost and thaw until the grain stands out in sharp, undulating ridges. Lucius places his hand on the rung above him. The wood is encased in a microscopic sheath of ice that feels like cold glass. He grips it firmly, the leather of his gloves making a dry, protesting creak as the pressure of his palm meets the unyielding timber. With every step upward, the liquid chink-chink of his chainmail follows him, a rhythmic metallic echo that resonates within the narrow confines of the ladder well. He moves with the deliberate slowness of a man who understands that in this temperature, haste is a form of betrayal. As his head clears the level of the battlements, the world expands into a breathtaking, monochromatic vista of indigo and silver. The wind here, 30 feet above the ground, is a different entity than the one that whispers through the barracks. It is a steady, laminar flow of Arctic air that has traveled across the vast, unbroken forests of Germania, gathering a crystalline purity that tastes of deep ice and ancient stone. Lucius steps onto the walkway. The floor is composed of massive slabs of limestone, grit-textured and porous. Every surface is coated in a delicate, fur-like layer of hoarfrost that sparkles under the light of a waxing moon. The moonlight is not bright, but it is pervasive, a cold, blue-white radiance that strips the world of its color and replaces it with a spectrum of shimmering grays. He begins his first circuit of the northern wall. This is a path he has walked 1,000 times, a ritual of 300 paces from the corner tower to the central gatehouse. He walks with a measured gait, his hobnailed boots striking the frozen stone with a sharp, rhythmic clack. Crunch, clack. The clack is the sound of iron hitting limestone. The crunch is the sound of the frost crystals being pulverized beneath his weight. He listens to the cadence, a solitary heartbeat in the vast silence of the night. His scutum, the heavy shield, rests against his left thigh, its bronze edge occasionally brushing his iron-clad knee with a soft, melodic tink. He reaches the first crenellation, the gap in the stone parapet. He stops and leans his shield against the wall. The sound of the wood hitting the stone is a dull, hollow thud that seems to be swallowed instantly by the vastness of the landscape. He rests his forearms on the cold stone of the Merlin. The limestone is freezing, its chill penetrating through the layers of his cloak and the padding of his sleeves. He does not pull away. He accepts the cold as a grounding force. He looks out across the extramuros, the space beyond the walls. The Danubius lies a quarter-mile distant, a dark, winding artery of shadow cutting through the white expanse of the valley. In the moonlight, the river is no longer leaden. It is a ribbon of liquid obsidian, shimmering with the reflected light of the stars. The river smoke, the thick mist rising from the water, has grown into a vast, ethereal sea of white that rolls across the floodplains in slow, silent waves. It looks like a ghostly army of clouds, marching with a patience that exceeds that of any empire. Lucius watches the mist as it curls around the skeletal remains of a summer vineyard. The movements are hypnotic, a slow-motion dance of vapor that seems to have no beginning and no end. He shifts his weight. The iron rings of his larica hamata slide over one another with a soft sh-ch-ch-ch-chink, a sound like dry leaves being stirred by a breeze. He looks up at the sky. The stars are so brilliant they seem to vibrate in the thin, frigid air. He identifies the familiar constellations, the Great Bear, circling the North Star with a slow, celestial inevitability. The hunter Orion, his belt a perfect line of 3 diamond-bright points. He watches the transit of the moon. It moves with a glacial pace, its light catching the individual snowflakes that drift, solitary and aimless, through the air. Each snowflake is a tiny, glowing spark that vanishes as soon as it touches the dark wool of his cloak. He resumes his walk. Clack, crunch, clack. He focuses on the sensation of his own breathing. Within the confines of his helmet, the sound of his breath is amplified, a rhythmic, oceanic hiss-hoo, hiss-hoo. He feels the air enter his nostrils, so cold it feels like a physical presence, a sharp needle of clarity that travels down into his lungs. He feels the warmth of his core being exhaled, a thick plume of steam that swirls out through the face guard of the helmet before being swept away by the wind. He is a closed system of Roman order, a pocket of biological heat maintaining its integrity in a world of absolute zero. He reaches the gatehouse. The timber doors below are shut and barred, a massive barrier of oak and iron. He stands above them, looking down into the courtyard of the fort. From this height, the castrum looks like a geometric map carved in stone and snow. He can see the faint, orange glow of the various barracks hearths reflected in the high vents. It is a comforting sight. The hidden warmth of his comrades, the slow, domestic business of the night fires. He thinks of the grain in the granaries, the leather in the workshops, and the iron in the armory. Everything is in its place. Everything is accounted for. He turns to begin the return leg of his circuit. The act of turning is a slow, structural movement. He pivots on the heel of his right boot, the hobnails making a grinding scritch on the stone. He shifts the weight of his shield to his other side. He takes his pilum, the heavy javelin, and rests the butt of the ashwood shaft on the ground. The wood makes a solid, resonant thack. He stands there for a moment, a silhouette of iron and wool against the stars. He feels the weight of the helmet on his head, the pressure of the chin strap, the way the wool of his pinula smells of pine resin and old wood smoke. It is a heavy, honest existence. The hours pass with a profound, beautiful monotony. Time is measured not by a clock, but by the slow transit of the moon across the sky and the gradual accumulation of frost on his shield. He notices the patterns the frost makes on the bronze boss of the scutum, intricate, fractal ferns that grow with a silent, crystalline ambition. He spends a long time observing one particular crystal, watching as it branches out, a tiny silver tree in a frozen forest. He finds himself lost in the geometry of it, the way the cold creates order out of the invisible moisture of the air. He begins another circuit. Clack, crunch, clack. He has become a part of the wall. His footsteps have carved a path through the hoarfrost, a dark ribbon of stone revealed amidst the white. He thinks of the generations of soldiers who have walked this same path and the generations who will walk it after him. The empire is a thing of long durations, a slow, steady pulse that spans centuries. In the stillness of the winter night, the boundaries between the past, the present, and the future seem to dissolve. There is only the wall, the wind, and the duty. The blue hour of the pre-dawn begins to approach, though the sun is still far below the horizon. The sky shifts from a velvety black to a deep, translucent sapphire. The stars begin to pale, their sharp brilliance softening into a gentle glow. The mist over the Danubius thickens, turning into a solid wall of white that obscures the river entirely. The world is at its coldest now, the temperature reaching a profound, absolute stillness. Lucius feels the chill beginning to penetrate the final layers of his padding, a slow, creeping numbness in his toes and fingertips. He does not mind. It is the final trial of the watch, the last hurdle before the relief. He hears it then, the distant, rhythmic sound of boots on the ladder at the far tower. It is a faint thump, 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 followed by the familiar chink-jingle of chainmail. It is the sound of his relief. He does not rush toward them. He completes his final circuit with the same measured pace he used for the first. He reaches the meeting point just as the other soldier, a man named Decimus, clears the top of the ladder. They exchange no words. There is no need for them. Decimus steps onto the walkway, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the morning. They share a silent nod, a recognition of the watch completed and the watch begun. Lucius hands over the small bronze token that signifies the transfer of duty. The metal is cold, but the contact of their gloved hands is a brief, human warmth. Decimus takes his place at the crenellation, and Lucius turns toward the ladder. The descent is easier than the climb, the weight of his armor working with gravity. He reaches the ground and begins the walk back to the barracks. The courtyard is still silent, the snow crisp and untouched. He reaches the door of his contubernium. He presses the latch click and enters. The warmth of the room hits him like a physical embrace, a thick, aromatic wave of wood smoke and sleeping men. He moves to his bunk and begins the slow process of undressing. He removes the helmet, the air hitting his damp hair with a sharp, cooling sensation. He unlaces the cloak, the heavy wool falling away with a soft woof. He removes the armor, the rings making their final, cascading chink-chink jingle as he settles the mass into its chest. He removes the subarmales, the tunic, and finally the boots. He climbs into his bunk, pulling the heavy wool blankets up to his chin. The straw mattress makes a soft, compressed crush sound as it settles beneath him. He feels the warmth of his own body beginning to build up under the covers, a slow, radiant heat that chases away the lingering chill of the battlements. He listens to the rhythmic breathing of his comrades, the low-frequency hum of the fortress, and the distant, mournful sigh of the wind against the stone walls. The world outside is a wilderness of ice and shadow, but here, in the heart of the Legion, there is peace. Lucius closes his eyes. The images of the moonlit river, the shimmering frost, and the crystalline stars dance behind his eyelids for a fleeting moment before dissolving into a soft, gray fog. His breathing slows, matching the steady, hypnotic cadence of the camp. He drifts into a deep, dreamless sleep, held in the timeless embrace of the winter night. The end.